Opening the Road, Victor Hugo Green and His Green Book, written by Keila V. Dawson, illustrated by Aliana Harris. Opening the Road. Victor Hugo Green was tired of hearing no. Victor loved the freedom of driving on the open road, but too often the road was closed to him. It was like this for most Black people in the United States. When he and his wife Alma traveled from New York to Virginia to visit family, they risked getting turned away, yelled at, even hurt. Black motorists were told, no food, no vacancy, no bathroom. For Black people. White American travelers could stop at any roadside restaurant, hotel, or restroom. But Black Americans had to pack cold food, blankets, and pillows for sleeping in the car, and a make-do toilet. Is that fair? No, absolutely not. This is the inequality that Black people were facing at the time. But Black people are still facing inequality today. And it's our job to have a voice and make it heard that it's not okay. We all need to be treated equal regardless of skin color. In southern states, Jim Crow laws kept Black and white Americans apart. No drinking from the same water fountain. No walking through the same door. No sitting together. And the separate Black spaces were always second class, if they existed at all. And what they mean when they say second class is, look at how nice this water fountain is compared to this one. Again, completely unfair, completely unfounded. These little girls should be treated the exact same way, but they're not. On road trips, with nowhere safe to stop and stay, Black motorists often drove at night, all night. If they had an accident, ambulances and hospitals refused to help them. If they were lucky, they could find a Black funeral director to bring them to a hospital. But there wasn't always a hospital nearby that treated Black patients. How does this make you feel? It makes me feel so angry. Up north and out west, Black drivers feared getting lost or having car trouble in the wrong town at the wrong time. At sunset in sundown towns, the sound of a siren or a white man's wave signaled, "Leave now." Even in Victor's home state of New York, where there were anti-discrimination laws, many restaurants, businesses, schools, and parks did not welcome Black people. And that sign says, "Whites only after dark." And he's pointing. One day, Victor read a Jewish newspaper with information about Jewish-owned hotels and vacation resorts in New York. He discovered a guide for Jewish people with lists of stores that sold kosher food. In the 1930s, Jewish Americans couldn't go everywhere they wanted to either. This gave Victor an idea. What if he wrote a book with information about where Black Americans were safe and welcome? Where Black Americans were safe and welcome. Shouldn't Black Americans be safe and welcome everywhere any American is? Yes, they should be. But some people still have hate in their heart. So Victor asked his friends and neighbors in Harlem where they safely dined, shopped, and played in the city. Victor worked as a mail carrier. Along his postal route, Victor asked folks about places that were welcoming to Black people too. After lugging his heavy mail sack in heat, rain, sleet, or snow all day, Victor worked on the book at night. Sometimes he'd nod off while sorting and compiling his growing lists. So he worked all day, and then at night he worked tirelessly on this book to help Black Americans find a place where they could go while they were traveling that would be safe. Victor finished the Negro Motorist Green Book in 1936. It was a 10-page guide filled with safe spaces and friendly faces for Black travelers in New York City. The following year, he updated the guide. "Let's all get together and make motoring better," he wrote. With copies in hand, Victor visited Black churches and social clubs to persuade New Yorkers to buy his book. It sold like hotcakes. And it's unsurprising that it sold so well because people wanted to know, Black people wanted to know where they could go that they would feel safe. Can you imagine not feeling like you could travel, wondering at every moment when you were in the car if it was safe to stop? Heartbreaking. And again, this is something that we are still facing today. When Black Americans, if they get pulled over by a police officer, do you think that they feel safe? No, because they've been treated unfairly time and time and time again. And it's our job to say, this isn't right, this isn't fair. Customers called it the Green Book and begged Victor to include other states in his guide. So Victor wrote letters asking mail carriers all over the country for the names and addresses of places that welcomed Black customers. Replies poured in. Victor and Alma worked together to expand the guide. 2 years later, the Green Book more than doubled in size to 28 pages. Do you remember how many pages it started with? 10, and now we're up to 28. So it's really closer to 3 times the original size. That means there are more and more places. With Victor's Green Book, Black travelers knew where to go and who to trust. Hungry? Check the Green Book. Tired? Check the Green Book. Sick? Check the Green Book. Because the Green Book has those answers. To keep the guide current, Victor asked readers for recommendations. He hired sales agents to find Black-owned businesses to add. News about the guide mostly spread by word of mouth. Then, in 1940, Victor happily announced that the U.S. government named it an official Negro travel guide. When a national chain of gas stations started selling the Green Book, travelers filling their tanks were happy to find the helpful guide. The Green Book flew off the shelves. In cities with no hotels willing to rent to Black people, some Black female entrepreneurs rented out rooms in their homes. Tourists showed up at all hours of the day or night on strangers' doorsteps. But with the Green Book, they knew they were arriving somewhere safe. Carry your Green Book with you, Victor urged. You may need it. The Green Book became more than a travel guide. It also helped readers learn about Black achievements and Black history. The guide steered families toward cities with thriving Black communities. It listed colleges that accepted Black students. Even famous Black singers, musicians, movie stars, and athletes used the Green Book. That says, more than 2 million copies of the Green Book were sold. It made it possible for Black families to enjoy vacations. They went hiking in the mountains, swimming on the seashore, and horseback riding in the countryside at businesses run by Black owners. So they finally felt like it was safe to be able to do this. In the 1950s and 60s, Black Americans were also marching, staging sit-ins, and sitting with white allies on segregated buses and at restaurants. End segregation, voting rights now. We march, jobs and freedom, end police brutality. Something we're still fighting for. Jobs for all. We demand decent housing now, equal rights now. They were building a civil rights movement to protest racial inequality. Victor dreamed of a day when Black citizens wouldn't need the Green Book at all, when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States. When some states stopped separating Black and white travelers on trains, on buses, and in airports, fewer copies of the Green Book sold. In 1964, the United States Congress passed a law that made separating people by race illegal. The 1966 to 67 Green Book was the last edition published. The fight against racism still had and still has a long way to go. But now there was no legal segregation, no legal discrimination, no Green Book for Black people, just like Victor dreamed. So I'm going to read the author's note. It's pretty long, but I think that it's important. Sadly, Victor Hugo Green himself never got to eat in just any restaurant, sleep in any hotel, or use any restroom he wanted. Victor died in 1960. For years afterward, his wife and business partner Alma made sure the Green Book remained in print. Victor was just 4 years old in 1896 when the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Plessy v. Ferguson upheld the separate but equal state laws. These laws kept white citizens and Black citizens segregated and limited the places where Black Americans were allowed. They were restricted to living in segregated neighborhoods, couldn't use public buildings or services designated for whites only, and were less likely to get jobs that paid well. Laws in southern states were very strict. When northern states passed laws to protect Black Americans, the social practice of discrimination still continued. The Green Book wasn't the first or only guide for Black travelers, but it was the most successful. As a mail carrier, Victor Hugo Green had access to over 2,000 other Black postal workers across the country. This network provided him with information and helped spread the word about his book. It became an international travel guide as well, offering listings in Canada, Bermuda, and Mexico. Victor Green even organized tours, made reservations, and arranged cruises to Africa, South America, Europe, and more. The only time Green didn't publish his annual guide was during World War II from 1942 to 1945. Today, traveling is easier, but it still isn't always safe for Black drivers. In the state of Ohio, an unarmed Black man, Samuel DuBose, lost his life in 2015 at the hands of a University of Cincinnati police officer at a traffic stop because his car did not have a front license plate. In 2016, Philando Castile died at the hands of a Minnesota police officer when stopped because the officer said he looked like a robbery suspect. There is justified fear among Black Americans when on the road, and unfair treatment of Black citizens reaches beyond traffic stops. Today, organized protests and demonstrations against injustice in policing have grown into the civil rights campaign known as Black Lives Matter. Black Americans are creating new versions of the Green Book for Black travelers. For example, Martinique Lewis created the ABC Travel Green Book series, a collection of travel guides featuring Black-owned tours, restaurants, and places of interest to Black locals around the world. And Crystal Egley and Parker McMullen Bushman are working to develop a digital Green Book website that lists businesses, parks, restaurants, stores, and towns that Black people can feel safe traveling to. Even as movements build and some things improve, racist systems and practices persist. We must continue to work together to stop discrimination by getting to know people who are different from us, practicing being a good neighbor, and speaking up when we see injustice. And there's a timeline. There's a bibliography, so if you want to learn more and also Quotes from Victor H. Green. Let's all get together and make motoring better. Carry your green book with you. You may need it. And when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States. So again, this movement is something that has been going on for a really long time. And even though it is illegal to segregate and discriminate, it doesn't mean that people don't do it. And if you see someone treating someone unfairly because of the color of their skin, it's important to stand up to them and to say something. We all should be treated with kindness and equality.